Excellent. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. What a way to start off the morning with some spiritual energy. I hope that fires each and every one of the folks who are on this call this morning. Good morning. To be inspired by the work that we have to do to ensure that we preserve public housing in this city. I want to start by thanking my amazing Deputy Chief of Staff, Ms. Monet Schultz, for working with our partners here today, my colleagues in government, to ensure that we have this legislative briefing, but also to ensure that we have a level and a sense of urgency around this matter, around this issue, and its public housing. That's making sure that we preserve the homes that people, over 400,000 people across the city of New York call home, a space of affordability, but a space that keeps them here, a space that keeps them active, a space that allows them to be with their families, a space that allows them to live in dignity and peace, in theory. But what we're seeing and what we've seen over the last 40 plus years of disinvestment, the last 40 plus years of lack of resources and support, the last 40 plus years of just not caring, government not caring. That's what we've seen, and that's what our residents have experienced, and that cannot be anymore. We have to turn the tide. We have to ensure that people who live in public housing are treated with dignity and respect, that people who live in public housing are allowed to have their repairs done in a timely manner, that people in public housing get the investment and resources and services that they need in our communities. And that's what we're fighting for. And so myself and a few of my colleagues put together some pieces of legislation that would help do just that, help improve the quality of life of the NYCHA resident, help improve the dysfunction, help improve and dismantle the dysfunction that's the New York City Public Housing Authority. Yesterday, I toured 3 developments in my district, 2 NYCHA developments and 1 RAD conversion development with Chairman Russ. And the stories that we heard in the development about lack of heat, lack of hot water, days, months, weeks without gas, days, months, weeks without electricity or basic necessities. These are the stories that are unfortunately not unique to public housing and have defined public housing over the last 40 plus years in lack of investment. I want everybody on this call to know that myself and my team are committed to redefining what public housing looks like here in the city of New York. That means providing that dignified space. That means making sure that repairs are done in a timely manner. That means that waste management on each campus, each NYCHA development campus, is something that's equitable, but it understands the environmental impacts of poor waste management structures and plans. That means making sure that residents don't have to go 3+ years without adequate heat and hot water. That means that families are not split up because of these issues. And so I am committed to that work. I'm committed to making sure that we hold NYCHA accountable. That's why I'm the sponsor of the NYCHA Utility Accountability Act, which is a piece of legislation that would make NYCHA financially accountable to their dysfunction and not providing the basic necessities of utilities for our families and our communities. And so again, I'm going to step back so that someone else can step up. But I want to thank all of the offices that have signed on to our letters and our budget request letters asking for $3.4 billion in capital money for the New York City Housing Authority and $2.8 billion for operating dollars that would help reduce the issues of mold, asbestos, paint jobs, stoves, everything that is in the space of operating. So I want to thank my following colleagues: Assemblymember Cusick, Assemblymember Gonzalez Rojas, Assemblymember Burgos, Barnwell, Gibbs, Assemblymember Carroll, Assemblymember Cruz, Assemblymember Fernandez, Assemblymember Reyes, Assemblymember Gallagher, and Assemblymember Septimo. So I am just honored for them signing on to our letter. We have until tomorrow to get more sign-ons, and Assemblymember Mitayan. And so we have just a few more hours to get more sign-ons and send that letter over to the Speaker of the Assembly to get him to prioritize ensuring that public housing is something that we prioritize and we value. So I'm gonna, again, step back so someone else could step up. I wanna introduce Miss Dana Eldon. She's our moderator and timekeeper, so she's gonna be keeping us in check today. She's a resident association president of St. Mary Houses. And I'm excited for this opportunity to introduce her and to thank her for her commitment to this struggle, her commitment to ensuring that our brothers and sisters in public housing are valued and centered. And so before I introduce her, let me just say good morning to my colleagues who are on. I want to make sure I didn't forget any names. We have Assemblymember Epstein, who also signed on, Assemblymember Jackson, who has been a staunch advocate and supporter and signed on and helped craft the letter. So thank her and love her and appreciate her. And Assemblywoman Niou. So without further ado, let me introduce Ms. Eldon.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dana Eldon, again, from St. Mary's Park Houses. I am the resident council president here and also a member of the steering committee. So let us begin. Welcome all of you elected officials and resident leaders and participants to this Zoom meeting. So we're going to begin with our presentation. February 16, 2022, the Residents to Preserve Public Housing, or RPPH, is a citywide resident-led group of public housing resident leaders, including members of the NYCHA Citywide Council of Presidents, CCOP board. Lost my screen.
Sorry, that was me. It's just that you have the goals next. I'm sorry.
That's for my TA, Marquise.
I'm sorry. I know I'm messing up already. Y'all got me nervous. It's already got all y'all elected officials on here, but now I got all these residents making me nervous.
That's all right.
I'm gonna do a quick share screen again so Ms. Dana can see our so she can see our goals for today. There you go, Ms. Dana. Can you see that?
Yeah, I have that in front of me already.
Okay, if you can just go over the goals and then house rules.
Okay, so we will begin with house rules, which are that we be kind to one another in speaking, and that your mic should be muted while others are speaking. We have designated times allotted for each speaker, and we hope that you will go along with those without any hesitation. So I want to thank you all for coming this morning, and I am going to turn it over to Assemblymember Mitayan. Forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Assemblymember Mitayan.
Yes, I'm here.
You're
Can you
there.
hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us and being here. This is really important. We want to make sure that we are communicating and folks understand what the letter is about and the importance of raising the voices of the NYCHA residents and the assistance that they need. So I'm going to be introducing to the next speakers. So first I'm going to introduce Greg Husin, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, a tenants' right advocate for Williams Plaza Houses.
Thank you very much. Top of the morning, comrades, elected officials, TA presidents, community leaders, and all in attendance. My name is Craig Housen, a military veteran, father of three, president of tenant advocacy team, and resident at Williams Plaza Houses in Williamsburg. The effects of the RAD PAC transition on low-income families and people of color has been the socioeconomic isolation and misrepresentation of the most neglected and vulnerable individuals of our society. RAD PAC lacks planning, oversight, and transparency. There are not enough provisions made to protect the rights of tenants and residents. NYCHA has also totally absolved themselves of the responsibilities they normally shoulder. There's no justifiable method or criteria used to determine which complexes should be converted or which complexes should be given priority over others. For example, complexes that are most in need of these repairs and enhancement were not selected or even considered for conversion. According to our research, most converted complexes all had a few things in common. These commonalities include close proximity to waterfront or piers, close proximity to subway system, and these neighborhoods or communities could be considered prime real estate. There are numerous reports and cases of blatant racism, discrimination, voter suppression, and voter fraud that have all occurred as a part of the legal transfer of these buildings over to private ownership. This too should be viewed as a public safety issue affecting hundreds of thousands of NYCHA residents. There has been several confirmed reports of tenants being injured due to the manner in which construction is being done, combined with the low quality, unsafe materials used, which is normally complemented with workers who seldomly wear PPE. There's absolutely no oversight at all, nor is there a body or group appointed to protect the rights of tenants from eviction, displacement, and other forms of harassment. There are no inspections being conducted to legitimize or scrutinize the work being done by vendors. When work stops are issued by the city of New York, these are often ignored or simply taken down by the contractors, as was the case in my complex of Williams Plaza houses, Williamsburg. Which brings me to my next point, skilled, competent workers. For a project of this magnitude and scale, why weren't unionized, qualified labor workers used for this undertaking? The workers used are unqualified and incompetent. There are cases of workers engaging in fistfights inside tenants' apartment. There are several reports of stolen items from tenants' apartments. There are reports of workers entering apartments without permission or the tenant's knowledge. This poses a real safety issue. NYCHA's role in this is very irresponsible and criminal. The violations in these buildings continue and are getting increasingly worse on a day-by-day basis. Based on conversations with tenants undergoing similar privatization plans across the city and the country, these incidents are not isolated, but are a part of an established plan and pattern. The violations in these buildings continue and are getting, since November of 2021 and January of this year, there has been close to 10 deaths in just one complex. Workers are allowed to enter buildings and apartments without proper proof of COVID tests or shots or PPE. Workers are not doing temperature scans in the morning before being allowed into apartments. We strongly believe allowing the construction to commence and continue right throughout the COVID-19 pandemic had profoundly impacted our community and could have been a contributing factor in explaining the sudden surge in death rates in our complex, especially amongst our senior citizens between November and January of this year, 2022. We also have a survey which was conducted, which is available for display if interested. Thank you very much, guys. God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Hussein. Next, I'd like to introduce Manny Martinez, who's president of the South Jamaica Houses, to speak.
Good morning, and thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for being here and listening to us. For every dollar spent by NYCHA, produces $1.80 in economic output. A 2013 report, the economic impact of NYCHA in New York City and New York State. Adjusted for inflation in today's dollars, the economic output is $2.17 for every dollar invested, approximating to over $7.2 billion in city and state revenue, re-engaging and reigniting one of New York State's largest economic engines. As we recover from the economic turmoil of the COVID-19 pandemic, it would be prudent for the $6.2 billion investment requested from New York State to come with oversight, in addition to the current federal monitor overseeing NYCHA. Since the federal agreement was signed in January of 2019, the scandals of NYCHA have persisted due to the federal agreement's lack of direct oversight regarding compliance to federal, state, and local laws. This lack of direct oversight on compliance has perpetuated NYCHA's traditional pattern of neglecting New York State mandates, such as the warranty of habitability, housing safety requirements, and New York State compliance with Section 3 of the HUD Act of 1968 under the New York State Human Rights Law, Article 15, Section 291. Over the last decade, families residing in NYCHA's developments lost approximately $2 billion in training, employment, and contracting opportunities mandated under Section 3. I believe that it's also prudent to bring attention that the fact of NYCHA's 90,000 workforce in New York City, 60% of which work in what today is classified as essential workers. This investment would definitely bring back NYCHA families into a quality of life expectation with hope. And also, this oversight would ensure that this investment becomes properly used, redistributed, and secures the impact, the economic impact back into New York State when we most need it. I thank you for the time to speak, and I appreciate you all. Have a great day.
Thank you all for speaking. Next, we have Mr.
Ms. Eldon, you're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. Next, we have on the mic Assemblyman Harvey Epstein.
Thank you, Ms. Eldon, and thank you all for taking the time to be here. I see we've been joined by our colleagues, Assemblymember Gibbs and Reyes for being here, and we also have the offices of Senators Bridgeport and Jackson, the office of the City Council Housing Chair, Alexa Aviles, the office of Senator Clear, and Congresswoman Maloney are here as well. So thank you all for taking the time to join us and be a part of this important conversation we're having. And part of what we need to decide is kind of where we are now. What is actually happening? What are the current and future funding needs in the capital and operating arenas for NYCHA? And to go over those conversations as a community leader from my district and a good friend, and Marquise Jenkins, who's from the Residents to Preserve Public Housing, who's been a champion, not just for public housing, but a lot of economic and environmental justice issues across our city and state. So Marquise, thank you for being here, and I'll turn the microphone over to you.
I should unmute myself. Thank you so much, Assemblyman Epstein. It has truly been an honor to have you represent us on the Lower East Side. And I'm saddened because we're going to lose you as our assembly member. But that doesn't mean that we lose you in the battle to preserve public housing. So thank you, and I'm incredibly honored to have you introduce me. I'm going to share my screen right now so I can go over specifically what our budget demands are. So just bear with me. Again, I am being asked to present these numbers in front of assembly members. And worst of all, or hardest of all, rather, my public housing residents are most critical. But the need that we have for public housing is critical. And we are fighting to make sure that we keep public housing public under Section 9. And so first and foremost, what we are asking of the state is not to move forward in any way, shape, or form with the Public Housing Preservation Trust Act. Secondly, we are asking the state to commission an independent, comprehensive forensic audit showing how and where funding received by the New York City Housing Authority has been spent, and publicly release the audit findings and recommendations annually. Further, you've heard it mentioned earlier by our Assemblyman Khaleel Anderson, we are asking for $3.4 billion in capital funds for NYCHA in the state fiscal year 2023, baseline annually thereafter. Likewise, we are asking for $2.8 billion in operating funds for NYCHA in state fiscal year 2023, baseline annually thereafter. Before I dive deeper into these budget priorities for public housing, I just want to sort of preference a few things. So one, I want everyone to be clear that we expect the city, the state, and the federal government to come together and all do an equal part to preserve and modernize public housing. Second thing I want to highlight is that the list that I am about to present to you is not a comprehensive list of where we think all of this funding should go, but rather we are introducing a list to show you where we think some of the areas that should be prioritized for this funding. So with that, first and foremost, when we think about the capital ask, the $3.4 billion that we are asking in capital funding, that number comes directly from NYCHA's physical needs assessment. As we know, NYCHA has a staggering capital need, the results of decades of intentional disinvestment. This is now dire, and the NYCHA needs to dramatically increase its rates of capital expenditures to make sure people's apartments remain livable. According to the physical needs assessment conducted in 2017, the total capital need is $45.2 billion over a 20-year period. And this grows every single year. And so if you divide that $45.2 billion by 20, you're looking at roughly about $2.2 billion a year that NYCHA would need. And then you have to factor in that the amount that is needed grows every single year when these issues are not addressed. And so again, right, that's how we got to that $3.4 billion ask for capital funding. And to be specific, the state has historically provided funding in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars. We received $200 million in the state fiscal budget in year 2022. That money was exhausted, and we were sad. We were heartbroken, rather, to see that there was no money allocated in the state budget that was introduced by the governor. As I move on to our operating ask, the $2.8 billion, the first thing I want to talk about is making sure that we are filling the projected operating budget that NYCHA has outlined in its annual agency plan. NYCHA is experiencing ongoing operating deficits, and although it's projected to be losing about $25 million in fiscal year 2021, these deficits are expected to grow to about $300 million annually for future years. NYCHA does not have the ability to sustain such operating deficits without making damaging cuts. And at these desperate times, NYCHA's history, cuts would be unacceptable. We also think that is critically needed to increase NYCHA's capital projects division. NYCHA currently does not spend all of the capital funding that it already has been allocated. In spite of the dire capital need, NYCHA is leaving capital funding on the table every single year. We heard this at the City Council hearing about a month ago that was chaired by Councilwoman Alika Samuels. In fiscal year 2021, NYCHA spent 1.2 billion of the 3 billion of funding that they had allocated to them. That's roughly about 40%. We are demanding that the states provide more operating funds to increase the size of the capital division so that NYCHA spends 100% of the allocated funds, the $3.4 billion to be exact. Assuming that we have an average cost of $80K per person, this could create up to 3,600 new jobs in the capital projects division. Now, I want to be clear. We are not talking about more consultants. We are not talking about more executives. We want to create more opportunities and jobs for residents. We demand that the state, moving on. Got a little emotional in that one. This one is perhaps the one that you're going to hear me talk about a lot. COVID-19 hit us all, but public housing residents were hit twice as hard. And I have been working with public housing residents my entire organizing career. And I have seen public housing resident leaders step up tremendously and take on Herculean tasks during COVID-19, making sure that residents had food, that residents were able to get tested for COVID, that residents had the ability to get the vaccine, residents had the ability to get internet and tablets. If that doesn't demonstrate how residents leaders can step up and take over full ownership of their development, then I don't know what else to tell you in terms of resident leadership. We want to support those efforts and we want to make sure that we are giving more control to residents. And so we want to utilize resident management corporations to do that. We are proposing startup funds in the amount of $500,000 annually for 5 years for each tenant association that elects to start a resident management corporation. The resident management corporation allows residents to bid on contracts at their development. They can take on a single small contract and gradually develop capacity to eventually take on 100% of the contracting for their development. The startup funds are critical in order for residents to have the legal, financial, and technical support to get up and running. The first few years of establishing a resident management corporation are critical to its future success. Now, we envision 20% of an uptake in the first year. In other words, we think about 20% of the overall NYCHA developments, there will be groups within those developments that want to start a resident management corporation. And we want to grow that in 10 years to 100% to make sure that every single development has a resident management corporation. And to support that, and to further give the residents the support they need, we are proposing a new department of resident management at NYCHA to provide the centralized support for resident management corporations across the city. I'm coming down to my last slides. This, again, is more about hiring public housing residents. We want to increase the size of NYCHA's operations division. NYCHA's work order backlog has steadily been growing every year for the last 5 years. Currently stands at over 570,000 open work orders that have not been addressed. In order to address this backlog, NYCHA must increase the size of its operations division by 30%. This will require an additional $580 million in operating funds each year. Assuming an average cost of $80K per year, this could create up to 7,200 new jobs in the operations divisions department. Again, we are stressing the need to hire residents and not to increase the size of consultants and executives at NYCHA. We all know that NYCHA's problem with lack of funding is not an exclusive problem. NYCHA also has a management problem. And for those reasons, we are asking that an independent department be set up to audit NYCHA every year. We need transparency and accountability around how the way NYCHA spends money. A department of independent audit will be required to publish monthly spending reports with developments and type of work level breakdowns. This development will also investigate and make available whether it's done to resident satisfaction. So we want to make sure, again, that we're putting control and decision-making in the hands of public housing residents. The current cost estimates for creating the department is based on the New York City's Comptroller's Bureau of Audit in fiscal year 2022. So again, that is where we came up for the number specifically to create this department. And then finally on this slide, assuming an average staff cost of $80K per person, this can create roughly 125 new jobs in the Department of Independent Audit. Now, we were all disappointed with the state on this one. As you know, public housing residents was put at the back of the line when it came to ERAP. 26,779 families applied for ERAP. I don't even think that's all the people who need ERAP who apply. But just looking at that 26,779 applications, we are talking about $102 million added on to NYCHA's deficit that the state could have stepped in and helped address, but didn't. And for those reasons, we are requesting $250 million for a dedicated fund for NYCHA's ERAP applications. This assumes a statewide fund and additional applications in the remainder of the fiscal year. I'm taking a pause to remember all of the families who were harmed by this devastating fire that took place at Wise Towers. We need an emergency repair program. We are requesting $700 million in operating funds be allocated for an emergency repair program where tenants cannot afford to wait for capital funds to be distributed. Emergency repairs will encompass, as defined by NYCHA, danger or potential danger to life or limbs caused by a maintenance problem, explosions, fires, gas leaks, elevators out of order, floods, power failure, main sewer stoppage, apartment and door-to-door knobs, toilets, and heat and hot water complaints. We want NYCHA to be more proactive and not wait for residents to submit a ticket. We want NYCHA to do inspections every single year. We estimate that it would cost about $1,000 per unit to inspect roughly 177,000 NYCHA apartments. And then finally, one of the major contributions to NYCHA's shortfall, and the one area where we give NYCHA a little bit of credit, is that there were city and state developments that have not been funded by the city or the state. NYCHA treated those 21 city and state developments no differently. But that meant that NYCHA had to dig into their reserves to cover those developments for many years. Today, NYCHA only has $89 million in their reserves. We are proposing adding $400 million in funding to this reserves for unforeseen situations in the future. And just so I'm clear, we're asking for this $400 million every single year. So I want to thank you so much for giving the opportunity to go through our budget demands, and I'm going to pass the mic.
Marquise, I want to just thank you for your, really insightful wisdom on this and your really comprehensive presentation for all of us to really digest, and thank you for your leadership, and I'll turn it back over.
Hey everyone, just wanted to say thank you for all of you for coming. This fight has been a very long one, and one that we are still fighting every single day in Albany. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of the residents, and also especially Marquise for running down that entire presentation. You did a great job. I have to say that the needs of NYCHA residents are exponentially growing, as Marquise has said, and we need to make sure that we are addressing all of the things that he just listed, because there's just decades and decades of disinvestment that our state has not contributed to really helping to fix, right? We've had a couple of $100 million, well, several $100 million that we were able to get in the last 5 to 6 years that we fought for very hard. And that was the first time that our state actually was putting in funding towards our public housing. Before, people would say that it's just a federal issue, and it's not. Our residents live here. Our residents are the ones who are living in these buildings. That's why our state has to also chip in. And so I appreciate everything that you just said, because these are the things that we need to do. I wanted to actually make sure that we had some time to be able to open up for some questions. I know that presentation was really a lot to take in, and I hope that people were taking notes, because everybody should understand that these are the numbers that the residents are asking for. So if folks have questions, please put them into the chat. I know that we were already starting to have a very lively discussion about why certain funds had not been released. So I want to say that folks have to understand some of the history as well. Our government had a little bit of a changeover in the executive branch. We have a new governor now. And so there was a huge backlog with DASNY. And I think that was one of the conversations that we were having here in our chat. So I want to turn it over to the first person who asked a question, Chantel. She's an assembly member. I'm so glad that you're here, Chantel, because we feel like it's like a breath of fresh air to have other legislators who care about our public housing residents. Chantel, go ahead.
Are we doing questioning or are we moving to my part?
Oh, questions.
Oh, no, I was wondering if, I didn't see anyone from NYCHA here, so I was just wondering if they were here, and I was the one who said, why didn't they spend all the money for the capital improvements? But I don't think anyone from NYCHA is on the call.
Okay, so I will also just answer the fact that, I have asked that question a bajillion times to public housing you know, to NYCHA, to the managers of NYCHA and to Russ. And they had told me multiple times that, you know, people, you know, up here weren't releasing the funds. And then they were also saying that they had a absorption issue. So all the things that people had talked about in the chat were really relevant for the record. Did anybody else have any other questions? If you have a question, please raise your hand and I will make sure to call on you.
Thank you, Yuh-Line. Just to add on to Chantel's question, I've asked similarly of Chairman Russ, why even the $300 million that we allocated on the state level last year in the state's budget as an assembly restoration, why hasn't that been spent down yet? And there's just a level of non-answering, but also a level of dysfunction between DASNY. And for folks who don't know what DASNY is, that's a dormitory authority of the state of New York. A lot of any of our state's allocations goes through that agency before it's released to the New York City Housing Authority. And so there's dysfunction there and there's dysfunction within the agency, because now that we've made that allocation, they're like, oh, great, we don't know how to spend it. But the residents and their experiences, as well as our elected colleagues here, can tell you exactly what each development needs. Everything from elevator banks to mold remediation, to asbestos remediation, to rehabilitation of community centers, like Brother Manny mentioned. These are the things that that allocation should have been meant to spend towards. And because of the dysfunction between those two agencies, it's taking a lot longer, and we're hurting residents in that bureaucratic, long waiting process, and we have to cut that red tape.
Amazing. Are there any other assembly members or their staff that have any questions? Okay, can the PowerPoints be emailed to all of the people on the Zoom? Is one of the questions.
Absolutely. I'm gonna ask you to put your email address in the chat in case we miss you in the registration. But following this meeting, I will send a presentation to everyone.
Amazing.
So good morning, Yuh-Line.
Good morning.
And
Oh my gosh.
Chantel and Khaleel.
Yes. So I
I'm
want
actually
to
just going to acknowledge you guys. So Amanda Septimo, Assembly Member, and Assembly Member Latrice Walker is also on the call. But go ahead, Yuh-Line.
Yeah, so
I was gonna actually introduce Latrice. Latrice, Harvey, and I have been kind of like the wall that has like stood together. So this is old school, amazing Latrice Walker, who has helped to be a voice for our public housing residents for a long time. Latrice.
well, oh man. Well, I grew up in public housing, right? And so I'm a project kid and a community center kid. And I know, you know, what happens when the worst happens with public housing, because the development that I grew up in was demolished. And so I know what displacement feels like, because NYCHA displaced me. And I know what broken elevators feel like, because, you know, my mom and I had to walk up to the 18th floor on a number of occasions. But I also know what the resiliency of NYCHA residents are, because I went to law school each and every day, carrying my little book, my little bags, driving to White Plains from my NYCHA apartment in Glenmore Houses. And so many times, you know, they don't recognize, you know, all of the amazing folk who are actually in NYCHA. And I'm not an anomaly, because there's another, you know, really great lawyer who was a councilwoman, Alika Samuel. She and I grew up, you know, an apartment complex away from each other, which was like one was up the hill and one was down the hill. And it's been my life's work. And so I really want to honor Reggie Bowman, who is on this call as well, who called me to make sure that I was on this, to really state that, you know, I learned my fight for public housing from him. And whatever it is that, you know, can be done to support and uplift the work of my colleagues, I appreciate their voice in this. And as everyone knows, you know, the grit that I have is public housing grit. And so all they have to let me know is who asked we got a kick, and we're gonna go in and we're gonna get what we need for all of our residents. It's been a long time coming, and we've gotten a lot in the past couple of years because the state has really just made some investments, but they have to do more, and they can't think that that one-shot deal that they did was enough in order to take care and address the needs. I am 110,000% against the housing trust.
Thank
Again,
you.
see what happens when it goes wrong. And a lot of people lose their apartments. A lot of people lose the access. There is no opportunity to come back. And so I thank you all for the work that you're doing. And I really, am so taken aback and really just inspired by my colleagues who have really taken this thing on. And when you think that you're out there screaming in the wind, there's a whole cavalry that comes along. And so kudos to each and every one of you. Marcela, I know you're on the call too. Marcela showed up at my office yesterday with her crew, like, you gonna sign this letter? And I was like, I signed it already, but love you guys.
That's love. That's love.
Thank you, Marcela. Thank you, Latrice.
All right, so thank you, Latrice. And I just wanted to see if there was any other questions in the room. I see there's so many legislators on. Oh, tenant advocacy has their hand up.
Thank you for having
And
me.
Dana, I'm sorry, before we start, Dana, are we keeping track of time on questions? What's the time for questions?
Oh, we have till 9:52. But
No, but per person, like if someone's asking a question.
oh, so far there hasn't been anything long, but yeah. So do we want to ask for tenant advocacy to speak?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you again, guys, for having me. Thank you, comrades, all our elected officials, everybody on the call. My question is directly related to the RAD pack that's going on and the displacements that are taking place as a result, the human rights violations that are happening, and the deaths that are happening that are directly correlated with these happenings. What is being done about this? Why are we not being more aggressive in taking RAD off the table until more research has been conducted? This RAD, as far as our activists is concerned, is not helping our communities, it's exploiting our communities. What are we doing? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. Do people want to answer? Legislators?
I mean, this is why we're here. So a number of us do not want to have our developments converted into RAD and PAC. So that's why we're having these conversations. That's why we're creating this legislation. That's why we're continually talking to residents and to NYCHA leaders and letting them know we're our opposition. So what's happening now, you are actually a part of what we're doing. So is there anything else? Do you have any other suggestions for your lawmakers that can halt this process? We just like everyone else heard about the 40 billion that supposedly we're going to get from the federal government if they ever get their act right, to help us with all the money we need to preserve NYCHA. But that money has not come in yet. So that's why we as state legislatures are asking the state to step in and do their part. So if you have,
and there's a possibility that it doesn't come in, right? Build Back Better, they've said, that the finalized bill has not been completely drafted.
But we're definitely open to more suggestions on how to fight better.
Yeah.
So can I add something, Yuh-Line, just to what
Sure,
Chantel said?
absolutely.
So I just want to be clear. I want to be for everyone on this. There's a bill pending in the Assembly that Assemblymember Simowitz has introduced, and he's encouraging people to sign on to a letter supporting the blueprint. And people like members on this Zoom, Yuh-Line has been leading this effort. A lot of other members have been saying this is not what we need for public housing. But there is a movement in the Assembly and the Senate the senator who introduced the same blueprint as Senator Kavanaugh, who both encouraged this bill to move forward. And I think we are trying to be the wall to stop it. So if you are on this and you're a member, we encourage you to stand with us against the blueprint. But if you're a resident, you should be reaching out to your member, ask them to stand with us, because this is a fight that, sometimes it's lonely when we're fighting these fights, but there are a lot of members who have been standing strong saying the blueprint is not the answer.
So I do want to, just because that's a good segue, Karen Blondell had just asked, why are we 1000% against the trust, and what is our solution to keep public housing public? How feasible is our solution, and what is the timeline? And I saw that Joel is on here, Manny has another question, and I also saw Representative Gibbs had his hand up as well. So Harvey, Latrice, I know that Karen had wrote that while Latrice was talking. So Latrice, if you're still here, did you want to answer a little bit?
Okay, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
So
I'm doing economic development hearing and this at the same time. And I also want to shout out too that Alika is now the chairwoman, the regional director of New York, New Jersey HUD. And we were just talking about the disposition of NYCHA land. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. So it was a question from a resident, Karen Blondell. Why are you 1000% against the trust, and what is your solution to keep public housing public? And how feasible is your solution, and what is the timeline?
We need to ask Alika all of that. So I am 1000% against the trust because of a number of reasons. Again, I started my story with, I know what displacement feels like when NYCHA starts playing with language and playing with lingo. And Hope 6 was a project that they thought would have been amazing. Like it was, they've been working with some churches and some other community leaders and elected officials. And the deal was to dispose of all of this NYCHA property, and that we were going to build, units back. We were fighting for a 1-for-1 replacement. That didn't happen. All of the former tenants had gotten this promise to return. And I mean, I had to really fight like hell in order to make that happen. And I mean, literally fight. And it even had gotten to the point where they made children have to sign documents to say that we would not apply for the new developments because we weren't had a household. It was this crazy scenario. And one of the things that I've learned from Maya Angelou is when people show you who they are the first time, believe them. And so now why should I believe that once we put NYCHA into this new entity, which is not necessarily an authority with a different type of a board, et cetera, and we change the composition and the makeup of the DNA of a public housing entity, then who do they answer to? And so I believe that the federal regulations with respect to HUD is like the Bible, and they can absolutely 100% operate within those regulations in order to be amazing landlords. And so again, we really just have to fight for an investment at the federal level in order to get the repairs that are necessary to be done, accomplished. Many of the RAD scenarios that we've seen, some of them have been successful in terms of making sort of cosmetic changes, but they turned a development, which was a senior development, to now say, oh, it doesn't have to be a senior development anymore. We can take everybody in. And so once they do that, it also changes the protections that the residents have, because they used to have a resident association. But now that there is no more NYCHA at this RAD development, they have a resident association where they don't get TPA funds anymore. Now CNC has to give them the money for their family day and for the residents in the particular organizations. So you lose a lot. Like I've been through choice neighborhoods, I've been through promise neighborhoods, and this trust is just all of those other things on steroids. And if it didn't work before, then why would it work now? And so I think we just need the type of investment in public housing that we need, the same way we're seeing the luxury housing, the $120 million investments in order to build this, and $400 million for this. We just need the same level of investment for NYCHA. That's my belief. And so.
Thank you, Latrice. Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure to get to everybody else because we're running out of time and we already ran out of.
Well, can I
our
just, can I
action
just say one thing? And that
okay.
is, that,
Hold on one second.
that really felt like an emotional answer. And,
So Karen, I wanted to add one thing, which is that Marquise did mention about the changeover from section 9 to section 8, which you and I had mentioned at a hearing, but that changeover with Blueprint and with RAD, that changeover is very dangerous because then that would affect.
But y'all mixing up two programs. She started off talking about the Blueprint, which is section 9, and then she went into RAD, which is section 8.
And I
Blueprint is
also,
not section
I
9.
actually spoke about 4 different. I also said
She's
choice
talking about,
neighborhood.
yeah.
I also talked about promise neighborhoods, actually 5, because I also talked about Hope 6. And so again, I've been around long enough to have seen many different iterations of the same program. So just because it's still section 9, and RAD is about section 9 and section 8, doesn't necessarily mean that the result is not the same. And that's tenants losing the protections that they have always enjoyed. And once you creak the door, they're gonna drive a train straight through it. I've seen it. And so if you wanna, open up the floodgates, that's you. But just know that Latrice Walker will be on the other side of that argument and will always be for tenant protections, because I know what happens when you lose them and you become homeless because of NYCHA.
That's still your opinion, and I'm a resident.
Okay, I'm entitled to
And
my
I know the
opinion.
Blueprint
Ms.
as
Blondell,
well as RAD.
Ms. Blondell, thank
So
you.
I did want to make sure that we got Manny's question in.
Right, but you keep muting me, and that's disrespectful. So don't
Oh, no,
invite me to your meetings if you're
we
going to
have-
mute me.
Ms.
I didn't-
Because I have a
Blondell,
right to my
Sorry,
opinion.
We have an order, that's why, and
Excuse
Dana is
me.
gonna keep the order.
All right,
We have
have a good day.
number of people who are waiting to speak, and if we're going in order. So Mr. Reginald Bowman is next. Thank you.
Oh, no, it was
But I
Manny.
was
What's
next.
Sorry,
the
it was
time
Manny.
limit for questions, please, Dana?
It was.
Am
it was
I up
Manny.
now, or I'm going to yield to the person before me, and then
Yeah,
I'll go after the next person.
Okay, thank you, Reggie. It was Manny that was next.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, all. One, I would like to stress the need for redundancy and oversight. I don't know if you are paying attention to the 2019 agreement and that federal oversight structure, but that is not enough. They're not covering fully the compliance responsibilities have been given to NYCHA. And so now these appointments that they're making to these offices are same people that they're using to transition to other departments within NYCHA, and that seems to be a conflict of interest in that regard. How well are they holding compliance if they're looking for promotion? Secondly, is section of the Blueprint for Change is a Section 8 conversion. Everyone should know that. So I just wanted to know what your opinion is on the redundancy of oversight that we need, especially coming from the state.
Great, thank you. We're gonna log that question, and then Reggie, go ahead, and then Joel.
Yeah, I just have a quick follow-up statement. And good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Reggie.
I think that everybody calls me Mr. Bowman. My mother calls me Reggie, but that's okay. You wouldn't know. Very quickly, we've been fighting this fight for a long time, and the city and the state and the federal government have dropped the ball on numerous occasions. And as my Assemblywoman, Ms. Walker, has pointed out very clearly, we've seen every single iteration of these plans. In 2009 and 2010, the Association for Better New York and some other people who are involved in preservation made a commitment that public housing would be preserved and reinvested in. I think that we need to make sure that we stay the course to what we've been presented today, and then that these plans of action also be taken to the White House level, because the city and the state and the federal government, including the White House, have a commitment that they need to, or promise that they need to keep to preserve and invest in public housing now and in the future. And if they can find money the White House was talking about $50 billion for the post office. There's always money, so let them find the money to fund what we need, and let's stay united on this and stick to the fact that we're going from protest to public policy now. The public housing residents want the public policy that we're presenting, the policy and the budgets right now. And that's my statement for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reggie. Joel, go ahead.
Thank
My
you,
dear
everyone.
Joel.
And
Oh, there you
greetings,
are.
Harvey. There's a lot more oversight that the state departments could be doing. There's still millions of dollars that are coming from FEMA for rebuild. That's going through the New York State Division of Homeland Security, and they haven't been doing that oversight. We've asked DEC to come in at Smith and elsewhere, so I can send everyone a list of state agencies that could provide technical help and oversight that's not taking place. A lot of the NYCHA worker staff people are literally being abused at work in terms of health and safety. PESH has been doing nothing and just kicking the bucket. I think we should definitely look into the health and safety of these workers. I'm glad that we have the whistleblower law. We're getting NYCHA staff people coming to us with whistleblowing of telling us about this condition. So there's a lot more that the state agencies could be doing that you could be directing the state agencies to do. And a lot more technical help could be provided to NYCHA that would in some ways supplement their budget. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joel. And then I know that Karina's had one thing left to say, and then also wanted to just turn it over to Chantel to make sure that we could close things out. Yeah.
Thank you, Yuh-Line. And I'll be brief. I just wanted to kind of piggyback on some of the stuff that Latrice said and other members have said about the blueprint. My biggest concern with the blueprint is that the problem with NYCHA is accountability. And the NYCHA has gotten resources from the federal government, from the state in the past, and they have been poor stewards of that money. Now, when we create this trust, which now has a completely different scope of accountability and to its residents, and what we've been seeing with RAD is how evictions have increased and there's like privatization, and there is just too much opacity with the trust when the root of the problem with NYCHA is accountability. And we need to hold them accountable to doing what's right, because there is no guarantee that once we convert these Section 8 apartments to Section 9 apartments and they're getting this extra money per unit from the federal government, that they're going to be doing the right thing with that money. And what we've seen historically is that they don't do the right thing. And we are going down a precipice where we potentially are going to be taking the power away from residents and their ability to stay in their homes under this trust. NYCHA has a top-down problem, and we need to address that top-down problem. And every time I have the chance to, I bring up that top-down problem. I brought it up with the mayor yesterday, 2 days ago. I bring it up in hearings, and I bring it up all the time. That is the problem. And until we address that problem, no matter how much we restructure NYCHA, we are going to have the same issues on the ground in our developments. My 2 cents. Thank you, Yuh-Line.
I just want to jump in for 30
Oh,
seconds.
sorry, Amanda. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah,
And then,
I just
let's make
wanted
sure
to, I was keeping an eye on the chat and someone had said, if the state has to pass the blueprint, but we're not trusting the blueprint, aren't we contradicting ourselves? And I just want to be clear, because it sounds like there's a little bit of confusion around the blueprint. The blueprint has not passed. It's a proposal that some people have put forward, but I don't want to speak for every legislator on this call, but there are many legislators who are not in support of the blueprint. And I believe that's why many are here, because we're here to work together to come up with other solutions so that we can get NYCHA to the state of repair that it needs to be, get you the home you deserve to be living in, but not have to sell our souls and endanger public housing while we do it. And so that's why we're here for this conversation. And to the question of what's the timeline, okay, that person just said, I didn't say blueprint, I'm talking about the trust. Those are the same thing. So I'm happy you made that point. The trust and the blueprint, they're one and the same. And so again, maybe we need to just have longer conversations about the details that people maybe are confused on. But ultimately, I know that the
federal government has abandoned NYCHA, but the federal government has gotten a lot of things wrong over the years, and we can't just throw up our hands and give up, because that's how you lose every fight when you give up. Every fight is only one, because we keep fighting, and we're ready to keep fighting with you all. Thank you.
I also note that Assemblymember Gibbs had his hand up before, but I think that we lost him for a bit. Assemblymember Gibbs.
Well, thank you. I just want to thank you.
Oh, you're echoing. You're echoing.
It is. I don't know why. Let's see.
Turn your phone off.
Turn your phone off. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Is that
Okay.
better?
We'll come right back.
Okay, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you. Aixa, go ahead. I think Aixa is going to clarify some questions. Aixa, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank all the elected officials for being here, showing us support. Thanking everyone on the steering committee, CCOP, for being here. I, as president and as a steering committee member of Residents of Reserve Public Housing, I want to make clear that we are clear on what the blueprint is, what the trust is, and we did not come through figures by day. We've been working on them for over a year and a half. And, you know, in the last year and a half, I've been campaigning to be the chairperson of NYCHA, based on the fact that when NYCHA was run by residents for the residents, we had a reserve. We didn't have this backlog of repairs, all of those things that didn't happen. And so what I would also ask the legislators is to look again one more time at the structure of NYCHA at the top, and how do you include the residents in public housing, allowing us to make decisions for all of us and not allowing people from another state who spends only 3 days here and making more money than the governor there. And so I ask this because since we have this audience, the seriousness, it has been taunting for me. The pandemic, 9/11, all the deaths that
We lost Miss Aisha for a quick.
Yeah.
There you go, Aisha.
We are
Aixa, you're
over time.
frozen.
We are
I'm frozen.
There you go.
Yeah,
Look
now
at
you're
that.
not.
Okay, and so I just want to make sure that every legislator that's on this understands that this fight is for our homes, and we're not asking, we're demanding. And for you to seriously look at the legislation that forms, because NYCHA is by act of the state legislators.
We're definitely gonna come back to you, Aisha. But
And so I thank you.
Never mind.
Thank
got
you.
it out.
Thank you, Aixa. Thank you, Aixa. And I think that because Assemblymember Gibbs has an audio issue, I'm going to make sure to call on, oh, I think that's fine. All right, so there's no more hands up. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who spoke today. Thank you for logging your issues. And then I'm gonna turn it over to Chantel. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuh-Line. I have to say thank you to Dana, who is actually a TA president in my district, who's helping us immensely here in the Bronx. Marquise, of course, for all your work. Every Sunday is a good Sunday because we know we're going to meet and discuss important issues. To everyone who signed on to the letter that we are sending around in the Assembly, thank you all. I have over 20 NYCHA developments in my district, Site 402 being one of them. And the person I'm going to introduce, Danny Barber, he is our leader at CCOP. And he, of course, like any other day, was on that Zoom call, hearing from residents talk about the lack of heat, hot water. When it rains inside the building, in their apartments. I've seen, just like many of the other legislatures here, I've seen people homes where the windows had ice on the inside during winter. This is not just happening today. This has been happening for years, and we are holding everyone accountable, everyone from the federal government on down. And so my brother, Danny Barber, as you all know him, he is one to answer calls all time of the day for the residents. It's saying my internet is not stable. Okay. He is one to hold NYCHA accountable. He answers emails. He is on social media. He's doing everything he can to help the residents. And we served together during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, handing out food. And Danny, you know, what else can we say besides thank you? And the floor is yours.
Good morning. About to say afternoon. Kind of tired. But I want to first and foremost thank Marquis, the residents, for stepping up and being their mouthpiece. For so many years, we sat back and we allowed so many other people to speak for us. The lawsuit that was filed back in 2018, ending of 2018, beginning of 2019 to get us the federal monitor was the beginning of the residents saying enough was enough. And we no longer will sit by and allow ourselves to be systematically oppressed, poverty pimped, or any other negative derogatory statement that deals with oppression when it comes to the people of public housing. I've been sitting here wondering what I was going to say, and a lot was said, and it was all facts. Every program that Ms. Latrice Walker, who is one outside of my assemblywoman, who's one of my favorite assemblywomen, because Latrice is a mover and a shaker, a no nonsense, and she speaks her mind and doesn't care what anybody thinks. And she's also, and she showed me that when the system is geared to move, and because you move different than the system and people don't support you, the power of the people will always prevail. So the people stood up in Brooklyn and made Latrice Walker their assembly woman, and she's been steadily standing by the people in her district. And Mr. Bowman speaks highly of her, so I love her. And I ask her just to do me one favor: continue to be Latrice Walker and speak your mind. Don't worry about who don't like it, because I know they don't like me in public housing, and I really don't care. I'm just doing God's work for his people. So our problem goes way back. There were 21 city and state developments that the city nor the state took care of. And the public and capital funds and operating funds from the federal government was used to take care of those developments. We've been playing the blame game and the finger pointing game for a long time, for decades. We're at a point now where we no longer can afford to point fingers and play the blame game. We're about to be homeless, ladies and gentlemen. No one spoke about that ERAP program. The way the law was written, we were written out. We were written out not to be helped from the door, but the opportunity was thrown out there just so that it wouldn't be a discriminatory thing. And we knew we weren't going to get help from the door, but everyone pushed it in government that it was a great thing. I'm saying all of this to say, I appreciate you guys that are standing up to be allies of the residents of public housing. And I ask you just to give one message. You saw the press conferences, and it's not a threat. This is a promise. This is a promise that I make, and Marquise, you make sure that this goes out to every elected official in the country if they need to hear it. You saw the press conferences that the residents of public housing stood on the steps to do. You seen the write-ups and how the people said enough was enough. We've been begging to sit at everybody else's table. Now that we have our own table, people are fighting to sit down and talk to us. We will no longer be just a avenue for a petition or to receive a turkey or cookies or a toy for the holiday. No, if we're going to use words like partnership and ally, we truly need those words to be stood up to and respected, because the people will no longer stand by, sit by, and go for everything that's told to us. My mother always told her children, believe half of what you hear and none of what you, believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. Excuse me. And I just surmise with this. I was reading in Matthew, I think it was Matthew 20:16. It talks about how the gentleman who oversaw the fields, and he was sending people out to the field to work, and he saw the guy standing by idle in the field and said, why you don't go work? He said, because no one hired us. So he told them was to go out. And all of those people who were first to be hired felt that they deserved more. And at the ending, he said, no, he said, he who was last shall now be first, and he who was first shall be last. We have lived our lives in public housing, living in the pandemic, before the pandemic, and everyone closes the doors on us. No one cares. And they stand in front of cameras to show that they care for that moment. But we're continuously living this. We need money. We need the state to stand up to their obligations and to the constituents that put all of the state legislators where they are. We need the city to do likewise, as well as the federal government. So, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you as a citywide chair to shake your residents up. All the resident leaders on here, have meetings and speak to your residents and let your residents know that a call of action will soon come. If we have to take buses to sit on Simbowitz's lawn to get him to understand where we're coming from, Simbowitz, Kavanaugh, and anybody else that don't stand with us is against us from this day forward. If you're not standing side by side with the residents of public housing, then you are not an ally, you are an adversary of the residents of public housing. And we must begin to stand up to fight at it all means necessary to save our homes. Thank you, Ms. Jackson, for the time.
And you have heard it from my brother, Danny Barber, who is after me.
That would be me.
Actually, we're out of time, but Marquise has the floor.
Thank you.
Yeah, after that, nothing needs to be said. See you on Sunday. We got work to do, and thank you all so much. But wait. I got to give some shout outs. None of this would be possible without the public housing residents, without the residents, the Residents to Preserve Public Housing Steering Committee, and without the staff members of the offices of Assemblymember Khaleel Anderson, Assemblywoman Chantel Jackson, Assemblywoman Yuh-Line Niou, Assemblyman Harvey Epstein, and Assemblywoman Marcela. I got it all out. It took a lot of us to make this happen today, and it's only happening because we all care. We got more work to do, so thank you all, and see you on Sunday.
Can we talk for a minute?
Yes.
That's all.
I'm ending it though.
Buddy, huh?
I'm ending.